I'm going to give you a little introduction to form-based codes so that later on when you hear Mark talk about the one we actually did here, that can be a great conversation. I'm going to send around, just in case anybody wants to look at it, a copy of the Ephesus Boredom Code, so that you can see what one of these things really looks like. Our firm Code Studio is out of Austin, Texas. We spend all of our time really thinking about planning and especially about zoning. We have completed some full codes in Denver, in Raleigh, in Memphis. We're currently working on Los Angeles' citywide code, 500 square miles, a little bigger than my usual form-based code project, that's for sure. But we do a lot of smaller form-based code projects. We're just completing one in Nashville. We recently completed one in Hattiesburg. We're doing the area around the town square in Jackson Hole. We did the area near the college in Ithaca. So we spend a lot of time thinking about this. That's my office. So the office is here, and I live there. And that's really just to say that I kind of believe in walking the walk on this stuff. And so if you're going to be involved in urban redevelopment, you've got to invest in it as well. So this is all about plan implementation in my mind. And plan implementation is probably the greatest challenge across the country. All of you guys have a stack of plans somewhere in your city, town, county, etc., that is just sitting around and not doing much. Might have been a great plan, but if it doesn't get implemented, it's not a great plan. So what's that all about? Well, you have this big community-wide comprehensive plan with all of this analysis of economic issues, transportation issues, land use issues. You often have small area plans that have some kind of very specific vision for a small area. And you really need to code to those plans. That's one element. You need to spend to those plans, meaning your capital improvements dollars, et cetera, need to help implement those plans. And you need to align other kinds of public policy to match your plan vision. So that's what this is really about. It's about getting to where you said you were going. Some of this is also, in this specific case, about what we call the public realm. From building phase to building phase, right? That's the public realm. And you got to ask yourself, why are we in the business of regulating it all? Doesn't the free market, doesn't capitalism, doesn't the development community give us exactly what we want? Well, no. So that's why we regulate. So how much do you have to regulate? Just enough to get the really critical stuff we want. And that's a really key discussion in any of these form-based code projects. The fact of the matter is zoning is really a multi-purpose tool. Everybody thinks of it now because there's been a lot of rhetoric in the industry. You know, form-based codes, the silver bullet. I have an aquarium, I have a downtown stadium, I must need a form-based code now. That's the next one, right? So we spend a lot of time saying, hey, it's just zoning. It's just zoning. It's a special kind of zoning, and we'll talk about that. But in the end, it's just zoning. Good zoning is what you need. Good plan implementation is what you need, not necessarily our silver bullet form-based code. Zoning is about preserving and enhancing existing places. It's about incremental change in what you do to infill a place in some circumstances, and it can also be about transformative change, really wiping out what's there and replacing it. And it shouldn't enable all three of those at the same time, right? A site is either supposed to be transformed or it's supposed to be preserved. Pick one, please. Because when we set up our zoning and it accidentally does both, we blow people's minds. We thought you were going to save that stuff. You replaced it. Or we thought that was going to be all new and different. And you saved all that crappy stuff. What are you thinking? The typical code problem is balancing the neighborhood interests, the immediate surrounding people and the people who own the property in the project area, with the need for reinvestment, intensification, change, growth. Without growth, we die, right? So
That requires planning, and that requires public involvement. That's how you get the buy-in and make this stuff adoptable. So codes are evolving. The same way that computers have evolved.
Some of you are old enough, like me, to remember when computers looked like that, and now they look like that. Well, codes used to look like that, and now they can look like that. That's just simple fact.
We have a lot more technology on our behalf now, and codes no longer have to be dry, dusty columns of text written just for lawyers, especially since the people that design projects have the opposite side of their brain engaged. So when you don't give many pictures, it's no wonder you don't get a good product back. So the fact of the matter is form-based codes are not a new idea. Okay? We think they're only 15 or 20 years old because kind of the granddaddy of them all, Columbia Pike in Arlington, Virginia, or Seaside, sort of the start of the new urbanist 20, 25, 30 years ago. But the fact of the matter is, this is New York City's form-based code thinking. We got the so-called ziggurat skyscrapers. This is Wall Street way back when. Why did we get this? We got this because we thought we needed some rules. What were those rules about? They were about public health.
They were about tenement houses that were so tall and so close together there was no light and air. And we wanted to get light and air into buildings, and so this is what we thought we ought to do at that point in time. It was coded that way, and people built that way, right? In fact, it's really, really not a new idea, because back in Egypt, way back when, people adding on to their houses were threatening streets. In the old days, before we had steel and concrete and carbon fiber and God knows what else we put in buildings today, how did you get a taller building? It had to have fatter walls. So as people added to their property, they actually threatened the width of the street because they had to add on to get that taller building. So way back when was the start of all of our problems between issues of the public realm and the public property versus the private property, because way back when they set up a czar whose job was basically to make sure the street stayed wide enough and you didn't get too far into it, right? Fire safety, public safety, I can't march my full centurion, whatever, down the street. You know, the way it was designed for centurions, the interstate system was designed for tanks. We do this stuff all the time. The things that we want drive the forms that we get. So, this is little old me walking down the street in Peoria, Illinois, once upon a time when I was here. The improvements you're seeing in this image have nothing to do with zoning. Nothing about what changed in that picture was zoning. The buildings stayed the same, they're all in the same place, they're the same height, etc. It's all in the public realm.
So there's a huge gap between what private development does and what we do as cities. And that's what form-based codes can really do for you, is bring the public realm into play and make it part of the conversation. Code structure. Codes regulate form, they regulate use and density, and they regulate some management issues like times of day and things like that. That's what our codes do today. The fact of the matter is these elements are out of balance in most communities. The typical approach today, a Euclidean code, sort of, ever since 1923 when we enabled these, is we spend all of our time figuring out whether you are the butcher, the baker, or the candlestick maker, because it's really important to us which one you are. Because I surely wouldn't allow a tattoo parlor in the same place I allowed a nail salon, even though those are both personal services, and we all have tattoos, and our daughters all have tattoos. We somehow have gotten hyper-regulatory over use. When, in fact, the form-based approach would say, look at the fullness of time. That 1860s era building has been a stable. After that, it was a hospital. After that, it was an office for a while. And now it's retail or a restaurant, right? It's gone through a whole era of changes. But it's a beautiful building that sits in exactly the right place on the street, and we all want to save it. If we want to talk about climate adaptation and all those wonderful things that we've gotten all hot on lately, we're going to have places we care about investing in. And that's what form codes are about. So this is red on your zoning map, right? Everybody has commercial, right? Luckily, this is in South Florida. You can't blame it on Chapel Hill. This is also red on a zoning map. And in most communities, we care about which one of these we get. And yet we don't write the kinds of rules that make sure we get the right kinds of places. So what do we care about? We care about building placement. If you're expending dollars, this is silly. Look at all this infrastructure out here that has nothing to do with where the shopper wants to be over there. We have twice the infrastructure, and we're wasting money. The building placement needs to be enticing to the walker, the pedestrian. That's the shopper, not the driver. Parking placement. If you pull buildings up to the street on a big, fast road that nobody can park on, the retail will suffer. Duh. Right? I need to feel like I can park right out front and pop into that shop. So parking placement is really important. Building height. Don't make it too different. Don't necessarily make it in feet, or we all get Washington, D.C. or Paris, which have exactly the same height, the battleship look. In fact, when you regulate in feet and stories in combination, you get more interesting places. Windows and doors. Wow, we really shouldn't have to tell people to put windows and doors on their building when they're right up against the sidewalk, but in Streeterville, Chicago, clearly we missed the clue. We didn't get the memo. Use is now something that we regulate vertically. We're interested in what's in the upper floors as opposed to just what's on the ground floor. Little Trixie riding her trike cannot be on the sidewalk in this neighborhood. She gets clipped by the SUV pouring out of the garage with the soccer mom, with the car full of kids. Form matters. There's the same thing in an urban form with the garages behind. Streets are part of this equation. This is a street in Alexandria. This is not. These two streets have the same traffic capacity for the traffic engineer. And we actually prefer one over the other, so we should code for it. Public spaces are also a significant part of this equation. Public spaces are not the responsibility of the development community. Preferred roles. Okay, so you have all of these people engaged in the development game. You have the general public, you have elected and appointed officials, you have town staff, and of course you have the applicants. The general public's best role is to work with you on planning, to work with you on the rules of the code, and to work with you on the map, how the code gets painted on the ground. Elected and appointed officials are supposed to review and adopt the plan, the text, the map. That's their obligation. They are involved in special permits if there are any sort of super special things. They are obligated by law to be involved in most communities in the approval of subdivisions. The town staff, on the other hand, facilitate the plan, the text, and the map adoption, and their job is to approve and deny development applications. Because when you get done with the level of vision that is typically involved in a form-based code, you can actually set a checklist for development approval. Is it 8 feet? Check, it is, right? Not, do we feel like it's compatible with the neighborhood? We're done with that. That discussion happened in our planning phase. People planned, we coded for the plan, and now we're going to implement that plan. And we do that ministerially at the staff level. Form-based codes imply this. Now, in many communities, and Chapel Hill happens to be one, we have to take a slight step back from the ideal model here. In the case of Chapel Hill, the Community Design Commission is going to hold a public meeting to discuss the design of the building. But they're not going to be able to move the building around on the site. They're not going to change the footprint. They're not going to take a story off of it, etc. It becomes a safe conversation for the developer in which they're not going to lose so much in that public conversation that they could actually have their pro forma not work anymore, right? How many times do we approve a project and we condition it so hard it never comes out of the ground? Right? And we do that because the public process makes us do that. That public process needs to be involved in the planning phase. No matter what, and I owe this one to Peter Park from Denver, he showed this slide first. The code drafting approach has to be plain English and understandable. For a while, we went through this huge performance zoning phase, and if you multiplied this times that times the other thing, you could have anything next to anything, right? And those codes were incomprehensible to people. Neighbors never knew what was going to happen next door. We need to get past that era to the point where the guy sitting in his underwear in Japan can make an investment decision over the computer about your community, right? In the same way that the neighbor can pick up the document, open it up, and have some sense of what's showing up next door to them. So if we want these things on the pictures on the left, whether you want them or not is an open question. You could want something completely different. But if that's what you want, we can code for that. And that's what the image on the right-hand side is. If this is the street that you want, we can code for that. So let's make those decisions up front, not on a case-by-case basis, and be able to have a system in which applicants are comfortable and, in fact, happy to bring you things that implement your plans. Thank you.